The written record of Jesus' life opens with a birth in Bethlehem and a visit to the temple at 12. Then it falls silent. 18 years pass before the narrative speaks again. Those are the years historians call lost, though they were years fully lived in a very specific world. That world was first-century Galilee, hills and valleys north of Judea, dotted with small villages. It was Jewish in faith, Aramaic in speech, and Roman in government. Empires leave traces, and archaeology recovers them. Roads cut through limestone, coins stamped with imperial images, pottery imported from distant ports. The people of Galilee moved through this intersection of cultures every day. Nazareth, the village where Jesus grew up, was tiny, no more than a few hundred residents. Excavations show one-room homes built of local stone, plastered with mud, clustered around courtyards. There was a spring for water, terraced fields for crops, and storage caves carved into soft rock. Grinding stones, loom weights, and carpenter's tools speak of labor that began before sunrise and ended after dark. This was not a place of privilege, it was a place of survival. The Gospels describe Joseph as a tekton, a builder, one who worked in wood and stone. In the hills of Galilee, that trade was mobile. A craftsman walked to where work was found. 4 miles from Nazareth stood Sepphoris, a city being rebuilt by Herod Antipas. Archaeology reveals theaters, colonnades, and villas there, projects that needed skilled hands. It is entirely plausible that Joseph, and later his son, labored on those sites. If so, Jesus' youth unfolded between two worlds, the modest piety of Nazareth and the urban ambition of Sepphoris. That short daily journey would have exposed him to the sounds of Greek spoken in markets, Latin commands from soldiers, and the noise of construction under royal patronage. He would have seen wealth rise from the stones he helped shape, and returned each evening to a village where a family shared bread by lamplight. Such contrasts teach observation. They form a conscience before they form a creed. Education in Nazareth centered on the synagogue. Boys memorized scripture by repetition. The Psalms, the Law, and the Prophets were learned line by line, until a verse could be recalled without scroll or teacher. Reading was devotion. Writing was rare, but not impossible. Galilean literacy rates were higher than once assumed. Inscriptions and ostraca from nearby sites show that artisans could sign receipts and read contracts. A craftsman who read scripture aloud in the synagogue was not exceptional. The Roman occupation framed daily life. Taxes funded imperial projects and Herodian estates. Villagers paid in produce or coin. The coin bore Caesar's image, an affront to the commandment against graven likenesses. Handling money was therefore a small act of compromise, one that sharpened moral reflection. It is in this environment that a later saying, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's," takes on historical weight. It is not abstract philosophy, it is the wisdom of someone who has lived under taxation. During these years, Galilee was stable but tense. After Herod the Great's death, revolts flared and were crushed. Roman soldiers garrisoned nearby cities. Travelers on Galilee's roads met merchants, tax collectors, and zealots preaching resistance. News traveled by caravan, uprisings in the east, decrees from Rome, rumors of prophets in the wilderness. A curious mind needed only to listen. The rhythm of rural life followed the seasons. Sowing, reaping, pressing olives, repairing tools. Religion ordered the calendar, Sabbath rest each week, and pilgrim feasts that drew the faithful to Jerusalem. The walk from Galilee to the capital took several days. Those journeys were formative. A young pilgrim saw the temple's marble gleam in sunlight, smelled incense, heard traders and priests and Roman guards. He saw faith expressed in splendor and in burden. The memory of that contrast would stay with him. Historical evidence suggests that Nazareth's population practiced strict Jewish customs. Ritual baths found in the area show concern for purity law. Dietary remains, mostly sheep, goats, and fish, match the kosher pattern. Daily prayer anchored work, morning blessings, meal prayers, evening psalms. Religion was woven into routine, not set apart from it. Such continuity shapes thought more deeply than any single sermon. By the time he reached adulthood, Jesus would have spoken Aramaic fluently, understood Hebrew liturgy, and handled enough Greek to trade or work. Trilingual exposure was common in Galilee, where merchants and officials moved easily among languages. This linguistic mix later explains why his message, though rooted in Jewish tradition, could cross boundaries so quickly. Historians emphasize that these lost years are silent in Scripture not because they were secret, but because ancient biography focused on public deeds. Writers of the time rarely recorded youth unless it served moral illustration. The expectation was that a teacher began public work only after 30, an age of maturity. Silence before that age was normal. Archaeology fills part of the gap. Excavations around Nazareth reveal tools identical to those still used by traditional builders: iron chisels, wooden mallets, stone measuring lines. In Sepphoris, mosaic floors depict vines and animals familiar from later parables. In Capernaum, basalt house foundations and fishing hooks tell of the economy that fed the region. Every artifact regrounds the story in verifiable geography. The economic and social realities of these decades help explain later teachings. Debts weighed on small farmers. Land lost to creditors passed to wealthy families aligned with Rome. A craftsman moving from job to job saw the instability firsthand. When the adult teacher speaks of forgiving debts, of laborers paid unequal wages, of the rich and poor standing before God, he uses the language of daily survival learned long before any ministry began. Nazareth's isolation protected identity. No major road ran through it. The village relied on extended family and mutual aid. Honor and shame governed behavior. Generosity restored reputation. These social codes form the background of later parables about reconciliation and community. Forgiveness was not theory, it was social necessity. Roman Galilee was also a place of ideas. Greek cities nearby hosted Stoic and Cynic philosophers whose teachings about virtue, simplicity, and detachment from wealth echoed themes later found in his sayings. Whether direct influence or parallel moral development, the similarity shows how interconnected the region was. Galileans did not live in isolation from the Mediterranean world. By about the year 26 CE, when Jesus appears at the Jordan River to be baptized, he stands as a product of this entire environment, rural but not ignorant, devout but aware of empire, shaped by labor and scripture alike. The silence of the preceding years hides not mystery, but formation. When scholars test apocryphal stories that send the young Jesus to distant lands, they find no support earlier than the 2nd or 3rd century. Those tales satisfy curiosity, but collapse under historical scrutiny. The evidence points instead to a provincial upbringing, rich in faith, labor, and observation. It is the ordinariness that explains the depth of later insight. Imagine the start of an ordinary day in Nazareth. The first light touches the hills. Someone draws water from the spring. The builder gathers tools, checks the edge of a chisel, wraps bread and olives for midday. This is the rhythm that fills the unrecorded years. It is not grand, but it is real. It grounds a life that will later speak to farmers and fishermen because it has shared their routine. Those silent decades also teach modern readers how to read history itself. Absence in the record does not mean absence in life. It invites reconstruction through evidence, through comparison, through patient attention to context. The historian becomes an archaeologist of time, uncovering not miracles, but environments. Everything about the later story depends on these foundations. The adult who speaks with clarity in synagogues once listened in them. The teacher who comforts the poor once lived among them. The critic of hypocrisy once saw religion and power entangled in Jerusalem's courts. Nothing emerges from nowhere. By tracing the contours of Galilee, archaeology lets us see how the geography itself becomes metaphor. The valleys hold fertile soil, but require constant work. The hills provide safety, but yield little. Movement between them is the movement between struggle and reflection. That landscape still defines the region today. To walk it is to understand why later followers remembered their teacher as someone who taught while walking. As adulthood approached, the rhythm of life in Galilee continued to balance labor, worship, and uncertainty. Roman control felt permanent, but hope for renewal persisted in every generation. Local teachers debated how to live faithfully under occupation, whether purity, prayer, or resistance was the right path. In this atmosphere, a craftsman attentive to both scripture and the realities of daily survival could not remain untouched. He would have heard discussions about the law, about prophets who promised deliverance, about how to keep dignity while paying tribute to Rome. The lost years, therefore, become the years of observation, of listening to every argument that defined faith in an age of empire. Economically, Galilee straddled subsistence and trade. Fishing villages supplied salted fish to inland markets. Vineyards dotted the hills. Stone quarries provided material for Herodian building projects. Artisans moved with these rhythms. They were essential to local economies, yet never secure. Day labor and dependence on large estates created inequality that is visible in tax records and reflected later in moral teaching about generosity and justice. Archaeological evidence aligns with the picture of a modest but interconnected society. Storage jars stamped with regional marks indicate trade networks. Synagogue foundations from this era show community investment in learning. Simple oil lamps and ritual baths attest to devotion maintained through hardship. Every artifact points to a people sustaining identity under foreign rule, balancing adaptation with faith. When historians speak of Jesus learning from this environment, they do not mean formal education in philosophy or politics. They mean experience, seeing how empires project strength, how local leaders navigate compromise, how families hold together despite taxation and scarcity. Such experiences explain why the later message focuses on internal strength and mutual care rather than political revolt. The lost years reveal where that worldview was born. There is also the physical education of those years. Work as a builder required strength and precision. Stone must be shaped, timber lifted, foundations leveled. Daily exertion built endurance. That endurance later allowed for long journeys on foot across Galilee and Judea, teaching in villages and addressing crowds outdoors. The stamina of a craftsman became the stamina of a traveler and speaker. The body learned before the voice was heard. Language itself became a bridge. Aramaic proverbs and Hebrew scripture formed the cadence of thought. Greek terms entered speech through commerce. This mix produced a flexible mind able to move between audiences. It explains how the later message reached both villagers and Roman officials, how words forged in Nazareth resonated in cities far beyond. Each year in the lost period was another layer of preparation: economic, social, linguistic, and moral. By the time he appeared at the Jordan River, the quiet education of 18 years had given him everything required for public life: empathy for laborers, knowledge of law, awareness of power, and confidence in work, completed with patience. The transition from private to public was not abrupt. It was natural continuation. The baptism recorded in the Gospels thus marks not discovery, but disclosure. A man already formed steps forward into visibility. Behind him stand the hills of Galilee, the smell of fresh-cut stone, the memory of recited psalms, the faces of family and neighbors who never guessed that their local craftsmen's reflections would circle the globe. History's silences often conceal such gradual revolutions. Modern excavations continue to refine this portrait. Recent work in Nazareth has uncovered first-century terraces, cisterns, and a small house preserved beneath later structures. The finds confirm the settlement's size and modesty. They show continuity rather than legend. Scholars now speak less of lost years and more of undocumented years. Ordinary life lived in extraordinary times. Each discovery reduces speculation and increases respect for the complexity of the real world behind the texts. To understand these years is to understand how belief takes root in culture. Ideas do not emerge in isolation. They form in dialogue with circumstance. The message of compassion and justice that would later spread through the Roman world began among people who struggled for both. The lost years remind us that history's turning points are prepared quietly, long before anyone names them. When we trace those roots, we find a young man shaped by labor, law, and landscape. His metaphors come from soil and sea, his ethics from daily negotiations of fairness, his endurance from physical work, and his hope from faith practiced in obscurity. The silence between the temple story and the baptism is no longer mysterious. It is coherent. It is the normal, necessary period in which a life learns what it will teach. That understanding changes how we read every later event. It replaces speculation with context, myth with history, and turns admiration into comprehension. The figure who will challenge the powerful and comfort the poor is not an outsider dropped into the world. He is a product of it, fluent in its pain and possibility. This insight gives depth to faith and precision to scholarship. It anchors both in evidence. The task of history is not to fill silence with invention, but to listen until silence reveals its texture. In the case of the lost years, the texture is tangible: stone, wood, bread, and prayer. Through them, we see how a provincial craftsman became a moral teacher whose influence reached far beyond Galilee. The tools of archaeology and historical study do not diminish wonder. They replace mystery with understanding, which is a deeper form of respect. To stand today on the ridge above Nazareth is to see the same light crossing the same fields. The hills still cradle small farms, and the wind still carries voices of work and song. Time has changed the empires, but not the human need to find meaning in ordinary life. That, more than anything else, is the lesson of the lost years, that the foundation of greatness is attention to the everyday. If this exploration brought that world closer to view, remember that history is a continuing excavation. There are always new layers to uncover, new contexts to understand, and new voices to hear. Subscribe to Silent Shadows of History to follow the next discovery, where we keep unearthing the hidden chapters of the human past, one careful layer at a time.